Welcome back to the Cannabis Podcast. Today is Sunday, February 16th, and I'm sitting here with Phillip James Latham, Philosophies, another installation of Last Weed Tonight. And we're going to jump into some articles. Bear with us as we do this for the first time and see how this operates like all your other favorite podcasts do with some news. So without further ado, we're going to look at some articles. How you doing, bud?
I'm good, man. Been another week of a crazy clown world that we live in, but in some instances, some cool stuff's happening. In other instances, Palestinians can't go back to their homeland for
Right.
reasons that, Americans say.
Yeah, it's sort of all the good news and then all the bad news. Uh,
Yeah.
so what's an article you want to start with? You just we're talking about it about the Swiss.
Okay, we'll start with the Swiss one. I had the CBD one pulled up first, but we'll switch to the
Okay,
Swiss because I think
whichever
this
one.
the well because like you and me were talking about like hemp products and you
There we
know
go. Let's do
everything
that
that
one.
okay. So for a long time now, like getting into the cannabis culture and community and you know learning more about the plant itself, all of its benefits and everything like that, you start to kind of come to find that there's a lot of products that you use every day that are now being made with hemp or CBD or THC actually incorporated into them. And so I think, I mean, me personally, I've been using like hemp soaps for a long time. I think it's Dr. Bronner's that has like one line of soap that has hemp incorporated into it. Herbal Essences has a hemp shampoo. Then there's Giovanni shampoo that has a hemp shampoo and a hemp conditioner. But so it was interesting to see that this article
These
was,
like all over
you
the
know,
counter. You can get them at like a store.
oh yeah, like you can buy these from like I think you can get some of these shampoos and stuff from like Ralph's or that's the grocery store chain that's near me. That's a Kroger franchise brand or whatever.
Right.
Um,
Depending on what
but
region you're in, it'll be like your local chain, Southeast Harris Teeter, HEB in Texas here, or Whole Foods. Whole Foods actually has a lot of CBD and hemp and mushroom
tons.
products.
Yep, yep.
The
And
people,
you can get like you can still get like hemp seeds from a lot of these places. Like, I actually found the other day like there's actually some that are like super expensive now for whatever dumb reason that is. But like
supply chain,
I eat hemp seeds in my cereal, like in my like oatmeal and cereal and stuff every morning. That I have that for breakfast.
they're awesome to
Um,
throw in a smoothie.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that I thought was crazy about even just the smoothies subject is like people started actually juicing hemp and cannabis leaves, like the sugar leaves, not actually like flower or the like the
Hmm.
stuff that everybody recognizes as the standard smokable stuff, but like even just like the ancillary, like normally like the trim or the trash of the process. Um, People have been blending up into drinks and smoothies and stuff. It's
Hmm.
actually funny that that actually takes me to another one of these articles that I have pulled up.
And
Hold
just
on.
for the people listening too, there are two types of CBD if you're going to look for them. There's full spectrum CBD, and then there's like broad spectrum CBD. That's if you're getting just CBD. But inside the sunscreen and all these products, it'd be interesting to know if it's cannabis derived CBD or hemp derived CBD. I'm guessing it's hemp derived CBD, just because you can grow more of it right now. And
So
it's probably
that's actually another crazy thing that I was just talking to somebody about this week who his family, was growing hemp agriculturally as like a cash crop for several years. And we were talking about the fact that literally you can be, intending to explicitly grow hemp crop, but if your THC levels get too high, you're automatically, tip the scales into a, marijuana product and,
you're
your
now in a
hemp
different you're cannabis now.
you're legally accounted to something else, which is really interesting because I think that I can't don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure each state has a different threshold. Um, Some
Some
of
were
the
usually between zero point 0.3, zero point 0.4, or now they're raising it to 1%
I was just gonna say,
THC.
I remember it getting up to like almost a full percent if I the last
Yeah,
time I had like looked into it.
yeah.
Um,
And
but
soon, when these regulations do become more prevalent, they're going to marry them all into one universal standard.
hopefully, and hopefully at some point it becomes like, like you just said, like kind of a federally standardized
They're already
threshold.
doing it with the testing, so I can imagine it's going to spill over to the other ancillary industries in it, for
Yeah,
continuity reasons. When I was at the lab, I told my boss, I'm like, hey, so like New York's got its own standard requirements, California, and they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, eventually that, in order to have federal legalization, that's what they're going to say is, hey, it's okay. If let's say they legalize it, then they'll say, we're going to do a study, a 90-day review period of all the best practices of testing, um, and then basically come up with its own, universal guidance so that it's compliant among all the 50 states and
yep,
territories.
yep. And honestly, the fact that that hasn't happened yet in, industry that we already found has kind of like a pervasive acceptance nationwide is kind of beyond me. Um,
That's how you know how far away you are from it actually becoming a real viable thing, is that
mhm,
you look at the things that have to happen to it before it does that, such as, okay, now they could do interstate commerce, where, hey, as long as your standards meet North Carolina's or meets Texas, you can sell here. That might be where they go, you know,
right,
and it'd be easier just to have they'll have a universal standard and then they'll have state standards where, hey, you maybe can't sell in Michigan, but you can sell in Pennsylvania.
right,
Which
right,
that
right,
already
right,
that already exists in other things. There's things you can buy in Europe, in America, that you can't buy in Europe, like
right.
poison.
I was just gonna say, like, all of the
Like
food
all the
products.
poisonous food we eat.
Yeah, because the EU actually cares about its people. Wink, wink,
Right?
nudge,
Like any
nudge,
pasta
sort
you
of.
get it from Italy.
100%. I mean, I've been buying like product of Italy pasta from Sprouts for, as long as
That
I've
was
been,
the chain I was thinking of. I couldn't remember.
yeah, as long as I've been dating my wife, I've been trying to buy exclusively Italian made pastas because it was
Right.
actually crazy. Like, she's got maybe not like, celiac to the full blown degree, but gluten definitely like messes with her system. Um, or at least American gluten, because then when we went to Europe a couple of years ago when we got engaged, uh, she was eating the bread, she was eating the pasta, she was eating like everything that she like was trying to avoid like the plague in the States in Europe, and everything was fine.
Hmm.
No bloat, no gas, no, discomfort, none of the, other side effects and stuff that she'd experience here eating breads and stuff in the States. None of that happened to her when we were in Europe. So it was really interesting to see just like the true physiological manifestation of the difference in terms of what you consume, here versus there. It's kind of
Hmm.
crazy. Um, but talking back to the product side of things with hemp, um, interesting now also that they're talking specifically about sunscreen, hair care, and wound healing because all of that's all topical use. And what's the biggest organ on the human body is your skin.
And
And what's the easiest, you know, uh, channel through which to, utilize the endocannabinoid system.
yep.
And
Which
you're not necessarily
I implore everybody listening, if that's the first time you've heard endocannabinoid system, great. Make sure you Google it and do like a deep dive research on the endocannabinoid ECS, because the doctors don't teach you about it and it regulates our body. That's pretty important.
and, and also just if while you're doing that investigative process, if you come around the term the entourage effect, know that it is more beneficial to get a more comprehensive, full spectrum cannabinoid product than it would be to exclusively get like a CBD or a THC or CBN, CBG, all the different cannabinoids. You don't necessarily want to start parsing out explicit cannabinoid products because you're really, in my opinion, and what I understand about how it all works. Again, not a doctor, so like don't take this as medical advice, but you're not getting the same efficacy and true benefit impact that you would be getting from a full spectrum product versus a, isolated cannabinoid product.
You also run more into the likelihood that it might be synthetic, um,
Right. Which I think we
because it's,
talked about before, right?
yeah, probably. But usually, people will see broad spectrum, full spectrum. Um, but if it's just one cannabinoid, then it's been extracted and or created synthetically, which they are really starting to crack down on synthetic cannabinoids, because that's a huge
Good.
loophole. Because technically it's not found in the plant if you spray it on. So
Right.
if the plant tests for 0.3, THC, cool, it's hemp. Just spray it with THCA or spray it with THCV or whatever it is. And then you go, there you go. It's not you know, and then you can sell it in an unregulated market. Texas is blowing up with that. Carolinas, basically any red state that is starting to have conversations about medical legalization. The grift has already
So
started.
I'll kind of add to that a little bit. I was in Alabama uh, towards the end of last year for an interview we were doing for a project, and went to the gas station to just like pick up some waters or something, and I saw this whole huge case of THC Delta 8 vaporizers.
God,
I was like, "What is that?" And he
poison in a cup.
the guy behind the counter is like, "It's weed." I'm like, "No."
All right.
That's not what that is. But like,
And you're
have
like,
you
this is
tried?
Alabama.
That's literally what he said. Is he was just like, this is what we can that this is what we're legally allowed to sell. And I'm
Yeah,
like,
fair enough.
you know that in California, which is where we're from, a legal like or a cannabis friendly state, you know, gas stations aren't even allowed to sell stuff like this.
Mm,
Like, so this is crazy that I was like in a tiny little backroads gas station, and you're
mhm.
selling these kinds of products. That was like such a mind-blowing experience to me. He was like, we also have mushrooms.
I'd probably trust those more than the CBD.
That's what I thought.
I'm like, you know what? Actually, I've heard good things about you boys down here in Bama about mushrooms. So
you guys
I don't
got a
know about the
lot of the
weed
fun.
game because you guys don't seem too chill historically.
Good. Right, right. So speaking of, laws changing and everything, so this was another thing that you had kind of brought up at the beginning of top of the discussion, but Swiss lawmakers approved plan to legalize and regulate marijuana. So the forever neutral Switzerland decides to put its thumb on the scale in terms of the cannabis game, which I thought was interesting.
This is a very interesting development. I did not see this. I didn't have Switzerland legalizing weed on my bingo card.
Then nor did I, but this is as of Friday, man. So
As
this is
of
a kind of
Friday the 14th, as of Valentine's Day, happy Valentine's Day, to all you lovers out there. But yeah, Switzerland, to what he was referring, the neutral party, has been historically neutral in basically every war, because the majority of the banks and wealth of the world reside in Switzerland. So you want to know who holds the power of everything over the world, just look at the countries that are neutral and what resides there. So
this
there's a
is
reason
this
why
is
they're
kind of
neutral.
yeah. So you called this out when I shared this with you earlier, though. This is probably the most crazy line of the whole article, though. So it says a legislative committee in Switzerland has given preliminary approval to a plan that would legalize and regulate adult access to marijuana in the country. This is the key line. The proposal would bar for-profit sales,
You
however,
zoom in on that.
and impose a tax on cannabis products. So like you can't make money, but we can tax you for it.
That's that's
Sounds
very
like a
interesting.
sounds like an American. Like,
Right. Right. Now, okay, so what a strange, I don't know if that's a writer or if that's explicit. I don't know how important that is to the bill, but would bar for-profit sales. Okay, so so the plan would legalize and regulate adult access. So let's quote this guy. Today, the cultivation, production, trade, and consumption of cannabis for non-medical purposes is prohibited. Majority of the commission considers the current situation to be unsatisfactory and the approach to be flawed. In their view, strictly regulated access to cannabis with a controlled market allows better protection of public health, strengthening your protection and increasing safety. I don't necessarily disagree with that.
No, me neither.
I want to see this is interesting. They said it should still be considered a narcotic that's harmful to human health, most probably the lungs if you smoke it. Um, but it would allow law changes to grow, buy, possess, and consume cannabis. Would allow adults to grow up to 3 flowering cannabis plants for personal use, which is pretty cool.
That is
But they're
cool.
not usually a lot of states in America where when you legalize, they try to get rid of home grow, or they say you can
Yep.
only do one because that would make you have to go to their suppliers. Um, it would allow for-profit commercial cultivation by government licensed growers and manufacturers. Retail sales would be subject to a state monopoly with any profits. Well, isn't Switzerland socialist?
uh, I'm not sure.
Let me see what Switzerland's government is.
So while you look that up, I'll keep reading that quote. With any profits, quote, invested in the prevention, reduction of damage, and addiction help, the commission release says. Sales to minors would be prohibited and products would need to be, quote, packaged neutral, without brand elements, with warnings and package inserts and childproof. Retailers would also offer non-smokable alternatives and low THC products in an effort to reduce risks associated with consumption. So that's kind of interesting as well. So like they're kind of going along similar packaging standards as California did in terms of mandating child proofing, quote unquote, which also, by the way, ends up to a certain regard being adult proof because like the tech that they have to use to in order to like pass the
The
bar
little
of being
bags you can like
childproof.
slip your fingers in and barely get
Oh
any
my
grip on them.
God.
And then you end up just cutting the top off.
Or like twisting it with your fingers in a certain specific way, or like just honestly though, it was kind of fun to watch the ingenuity of the market, cater to that standard. Um, and the fact that they're going to offer like low THC products, I assume that would probably be like the CBDs and the hemps, or like the 20 to 1 pre-rolls and stuff like that. That's 20 to 1 CBD to THC. Those when I was working in industry, I think actually when we met, I was still selling the 20 to 1 pre-roll packs because like
Mm.
those were selling like freaking hotcakes because one of the brands that I was repping, uh, they were one of the first to market with really high CBD, low THC strains that they were growing on their farms. And they were able to just pump out like, packs and packs worth of product. Um, Advertising cannabis products, seeds, plant cuttings, and paraphernalia would also be banned under the proposal, which is also really interesting. So you can't do any
I,
advertising.
I'm okay with that as long as it's consistent for other things. Like if they have like a nationwide, like, hey, we don't do, which is probably not true.
Pharmaceuticals.
Right. Like, well, actually, pharmaceutical advertising is not illegal in
It's
Switzerland.
it's illegal in most other countries other than the United States.
There's literally 2 countries on earth that allow advertising of pharmaceutical drugs. It's the United
US
States.
and Israel?
Nope. It's the
Mm,
it's the little smaller friend of Australia.
New Zealand.
Yep.
Interesting.
Right. Where you're like, why New Zealand? That's
Huh.
interesting. But I want to make a note about Switzerland. I just checked it up on Wikipedia, and it says Switzerland features a system of government not seen in any other nation. Direct representation, sometimes called half direct democracy. Uh, Technically, the sovereign of Switzerland is actually its entire electorate. So this is interesting. I wanted to note any citizen may challenge a law that has been passed by parliament through an optional referendum. If that person is able to gather 50,000 signatures against the law within 100 days, a national vote has to be scheduled where voters decide by a simple majority whether to accept or reject the law. Now, that's interesting. Now,
That is interesting.
it's very interesting that they say you kind of like have a half direct democracy, and then they go into the saying like basically the state is going to monopolize cannabis. That's basically what it's saying.
Hmm.
Is that, I mean, think about that. Like, so they're going to tax medical? That's backwards from America. America doesn't tax medical and they tax.
Right.
Oh, I
Retail.
think
Yeah.
they're probably going to tax the producers of it. Maybe not. I don't know.
I don't
Um,
know. We'll see how it all shakes out. This is an interesting thing just to wrap up the Swiss article. In April of last year, meanwhile, a separate study launched in the city of Bern. More than 1,000 people from Bern, Biel, and Bienne and Lucerne were expected to enroll in that program. As of last spring, the vast majority of applicants, nearly 80%, were men. Products available from 5 pharmacies in Bern included 4 varieties of cured flower, 2 concentrates, 2 tinctures, and 2 e-liquids meant for vapes. So obviously, the cannabis market in Switzerland is still 80/20.
right. What's the population of Switzerland? 14?
Right, 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 right.
Like, so,
Um,
I mean, I think that's probably why they're able to do it. Um,
Probably.
because they know it's not going to be a huge, of their population, uh, how many people are actually really going to consume that much cannabis? It's 8.9 million people as of last year. So smaller than LA.
Yeah.
Um,
So we were talking about cannabis products, and I thought this was interesting because I think the last time we were on one of these, we were talking about like the compare and contrast in terms of the harms of alcohol versus cannabis, and the fact that cannabis hot cocktails, per Newsweek, cannabis cocktails are on the rise. Could they replace alcohol? I don't know that they'll necessarily replace alcohol because I don't think the alcohol market will allow for that.
so I actually, when I was in Tennessee in Nashville, I met with the head of the alcohol commission.
Oh, interesting. Cool.
And we're sitting in his alcohol store. So it's like his liquor store, and then he's like sitting above it in his office. And so imagine just like a large, nice liquor store with an office above it. And
Hmm.
that's when I was doing sales for a cannabis company, and we're doing like CBD stuff. So we're trying to get at the register. We're trying to get those little impulse register sales. And he said,
Hmm.
I'm not interested in doing that. I am interested in selling weed here, though. He goes, that's how I'll support it. I want to sell it here. And I swear to God, I looked at him and I said, that's pretty greedy, don't you think?
Hmm.
And he goes, well, yeah, of course it is. I'm here to make money. And I said, okay, I have no problem with you being able to sell it in liquor stores. Now, I don't think you'll be able to sell it in the same place as a liquor store. You could probably have like an extension, like two separate,
Yeah.
here's alcohol on this side and then here's cannabis products on the other under the same banner. But I said, okay, I could be cool with that as long as it's being sold, whatever, I don't care. But as long as you don't block home grow. And he just like thought for a second. He's like, I don't have a problem with people growing at home. And so I was like, did we just do a unauthorized deal? So it was interesting that like what you're saying, drinks, I mean, every state that legalizes cannabis, the alcohol sales drop, alcohol use drops, which is a huge, like you said, it's a huge reason why they're preventing, cannabis from being. I would bet the number one lobby against cannabis is alcohol, pharmaceuticals, and the DEA.
And then that's
You
not
know,
to speak for like lumber and all the other ancillary like hemp competitive product industries that they could have an impact on their bottom lines. But um,
everything.
yeah, so this Newsweek article actually makes an interesting point. So I was talking about the impact on the alcohol industry. According to Fortune Business Insights, the global cannabis beverage market was 2.4 billion in 2023 and is
Mm,
projected to grow to 117.05 billion by 2032. The cannabis beverage market is dominated by North America, shocker, which in 2023 made up a market share of 21.14%. The cannabis beverage market in the US is estimated to reach 81.44 billion by 2032. So 81 out of 117, that's, you know, almost 80% of the entire industry. Demand for
Hmm.
cannabis infused beverages is certainly growing, while the demand for alcohol has declined in recent years. PhD director of a program and biostatistician with behavioral health and recovery studies at the Public Health Institute told Newsweek. Diana Eberlein, chair of the Coalition for Adult Beverage Alternatives, echoed this sentiment, said that beer and wine sales have declined approximately 5% since 2023, but the non-alcoholic beer sales have surged by over 25%. U.S. alcoholic beverage markets, if it's evaluated at 2.5 trillion in 2024, I had no idea it was that massive. Holy crap.
I was
Uh,
just Googling how much it was.
and is projected to grow to 5.7 trillion by 2032. So it's expected to grow, not decline. Though this market is priced significantly higher than the cannabis beverage market, the projected growth for the alcohol industry is 10.74% until 2032, while the projected growth of the cannabis beverage market is over 4,000% for the same time period. I mean, obviously, that's relative to the size and scale of the industry as it stands.
Well, that's the
Uh,
global industry, not the US industry, right?
yeah.
Right.
2024 report showed that only 62% of the US adults consumed alcohol, a decrease from 65% back in 2019.
Hmm.
Recent advice from US Surgeon General linking alcohol consumption to cancer has heightened health concerns that may potentially influence consumer behavior. Oh my gosh, what if they finally tell people that cannabis can actually help prevent cancer? I wonder what that would do to cannabis consumption now.
Stop spreading misinformation. Stop spreading misinformation. Actually, that's
uh,
malinformation. That's not misinformation. That's malinformation,
yeah, it's
which is
bad,
true, but it's just harmful to the
bad for
existing.
business.
So real quick, while you're
Blah blah
looking at that,
blah.
I just looked up the
Okay.
United States alcohol drinks market generated revenue of $470 million in 2023. So $470 million, and the article says it could face a 1% headwind if they become legalized. So 470 million times 0.01, that's, almost $5 million they'll lose annually to just drinks, just cannabis drinks. And then, like we just said earlier,
Crazy.
60% of cannabis consumers reported uh, less alcohol use after legalization.
Yep. I mean,
So
less alcohol, less opiates, less pharma, less, you can keep
less
going down the list,
poison.
all the things. Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, it's a
Less
wonder that
poison, more plants. How about that?
yeah, a plant replaces poison. Um, which is also so I'm gonna skip that one because then I'm gonna
Plants
come
over
to
pills.
this. Amen to that. Heavy cannabis use linked to lasting effects on working memory, study finds. So I wanted to talk to you about this because you know, I don't know if you and I would necessarily consider ourselves respective case studies for a study like this. Um,
I'd like to be involved
multiple,
in a study like this.
me too. And that's why I mean, the reason I wanted to bring it up is to like kind of talk about like how do you think they find the people to be involved in these studies? Because like I've never been involved in a study, so I don't really know.
My biggest question too is that, okay, how do you have a control marker of their memory before they started using weed?
Okay, here. So
Does that
researchers
make sense?
classified 88% participants as heavy lifetime cannabis users, defined as people who use cannabis 1,000 or more times. Among the heavy
Total in their
users,
life?
yeah, 63% showed reduced brain activity while performing a working memory task, as did 68% of recent users.
Well, so, okay. So they basically just said, go back up to that little part. I want to read this very specifically. It said, reduced brain activity while performing a working memory task. I'm guessing while they're stoned. It's probably not, or working memory. But okay, how much reduced brain activity? Like 1% brain
Yeah.
active, 2%. And then what's a working memory task? You know,
So I'm wondering if the article, I think the article actually says that. Example of a working
there
memory
you
task
go.
is following instructions your boss has just given you. Lead author of the study and assistant professor of radiology at Colorado at a school of medicine. Or you could be looking over your shoulder while driving to see a blind spot, but then forgetting about it once you turn your head.
I
I don't
could,
know.
I, I'll concede that I've walked into a room multiple times and forgot why I went in that room.
Yeah, but like I feel like doesn't
That's
everybody
got
do
nothing to
that?
do with weed, though.
Yeah, like that like I did that like the other day. I like walked up into my bedroom. Like I knew that I needed to get something. I had a thought as soon as I like crossed the threshold into my bedroom that distracted me from what I knew my intent was, and then I couldn't remember why I initially went in there. But then I walked out of the room and walked, to do something else, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I remember." And then I went and got the thing that I went in there for.
Go down to
So,
these next two. These are interesting. It says heavy, the third paragraph, heavy cannabis use was associated with lower brain activation only during the working memory task, even after excluding people who had recently used cannabis. The impact of cannabis use was less significant for other tasks. So in my estimation, that says if you're just doing a task like, hey, screw in this light bulb, you know, you can do it because that's not a memory, that's not a working
hmm
memory task.
hmm
Um, so okay, that makes a little bit more sense. If you have to do something from like you have to draw upon, and we all know this, you're sharper when you don't smoke. Like
Sure.
you are. Like I'm not gonna deny that.
But that's the funny thing is like there was the documentary Super High Me that came out, years and years ago with Doug Benson.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really funny, like the way that obviously he uses his comedic background and everything like that,
Mhm.
but it was really funny to see the comparative analysis that was done for the like pre being stoned and then just like ridiculously stoned tests. Because it wasn't
Vague.
like, yeah, dude, it wasn't like he was just like, okay, let me like hit my bowl and then go take this test. No, 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 no. This was like, I'm gonna inhale this full volcano vaporizer, pillow.
What you're saying is a great segue to this next little paragraph, if you want to read it.
To identify recent cannabis use of cannabis, participants provided urine samples on the day of their brain scans. If someone has a THC concentration over 50, I don't know what, nanograms probably, nanograms per milliliter, it typically indicates use of cannabis within the past 10 days. However, people who use cannabis very frequently may have higher levels for a month or even several months after use. Yeah, like the people that are getting stoned every day, they have a balance essentially of
Right.
cannabis in their system for months. That's why it takes people that are like daily users such a long time to ever pass a drug test because they've got the residual stuff in their system, let alone if you do the hair
So
test, no chance.
yeah, the hair is months. But it's interesting that this is coming up because I did a little personal test study. I had to get drug tested for a job when I was, getting ready to bartend at a hotel in LA, which why do I need to be drug tested? It was a Lux hotel in LA. So it was nice, it's real professional or whatever. And so I had to take a drug test and I was a daily smoker in LA too, where it's legal. So you can smoke
Mm-hmm.
good quality stuff. And I took a 7 day, I was like, oh, I need to pass this. Took 7 days off, smoked one bowl on Saturday, then took another 7 days and passed my drug test. So 2 weeks, a frequent cannabis user passed a drug test. Now,
It's
I do
funny.
want to say
I think it just
that,
says that in here. It's like it's like be in here for 2 weeks. It said that somewhere in here.
but it's also dependent on the quality of the cannabis you're smoking, how high the THC level is, how much of it you're smoking, your body fat mass and your body mass index,
Yep.
how much water you consume, how much and based on your diet. So
Yep.
and how much you frequently exercise. So if you wanted to detox, I would I have a working theory, obviously no data to back this up, but I think a lot of the people that where it stays in your system for months are the people that rip dabs every day and that probably a little out of shape. And, you know, I'm not saying you're fat or anything like that, but probably a little out of shape where you got a little bit more BMI than you think you do. Um, so therefore it takes longer. And also, if you're detoxing, drink cranberry juice diluted because cranberry juice burns fat and the fat stores your THC. So this is not advice. This is not medical advice on how to pass a drug test or anything like that. But if you're going to take one, start drinking a shit ton of water, start fasting, sit in a sauna, and only drink cranberry juice. And that's the best you're going to have, the best luck you're going to have.
Yep. Yep.
um,
I
so,
concur. I concur.
yeah. If you just start fasting immediately, the THC is going to start leaving your system because you're not replacing it. Um,
hmm
So will you pass the test? I have no idea, and I'm not responsible if you don't. But that's the only, unless you're going to take one of those like detox things, which who knows how those work. But the only way to naturally start detoxing is just stop smoking immediately, drink a ton of water, sit in a sauna, work out, drink cranberry juice.
Yep. Yeah, so I just thought that this study was kind of interesting, and like, of course, the conclusion is like may impair your working memory. Frequent cannabis use may impair your work. May we were there because like they can never be conclusive because science is never a conclusive thing if you're actually being true to science. The study suggests that these cognitive effects can persist for several weeks after someone has stopped using cannabis. If you use cannabis, consider how it might impact your cognitive performance, especially in demanding situations like work or driving. So yeah, man, like, anything where you need to be mentally sharp, maybe don't be like, stoned to the point where you have couch lock and you can't move.
Right. It's interesting because like, obviously don't smoke and drive, but when you see people, you could assume when people are stoned because they're going 10 miles under the speed limit and they've got both hands on their steering wheel and they're like, you know, trying to
Yeah.
maintain as they drive, as opposed to alcoholics. They just,
Yeah. Yep.
who knows where you're going to go, but that's, these are all awesome articles. Um, and
Well, I know something else that you and I are both interested in frequently is the whole, do you take someone's Second Amendment right away because they
ooh, this is
tested positive
interesting.
for cannabis? So this article is from Normal. If you don't know what
Can you
Normal
zoom in?
is,
Can you by chance zoom in a little bit on that?
yes, I can. National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws is Normal, NORML. This article is titled A Federal Appeals Court Rejects Disarmament of Marijuana Consumers. So, St. Louis, Missouri, judges on the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals have rejected arguments that the federal government can unconditionally bar adults from possessing firearms because of their status as cannabis consumers. The court opined that, quote, nothing in our tradition allows disarmament simply because the defendant belongs to a category of people, drug users, that Congress has categorically deemed dangerous. Rather, judges determined that
Patience.
constitutional questions surrounding the disarmament of drug users must be addressed on a case by case basis. So I'll just pause right there and say, yeah, the other thing that isn't really discussed in this is when you force people into a black market of, you know, consumer behavior, you don't necessarily always deal with the most upstanding citizenry. And oftentimes the people that you're purchasing from will be armed themselves. And, who knows what substances they may or may not be under the influence of, or whether or not their cognition is, totally
Right.
acutely on where it should be. And, if they've got a firearm, don't you have a right to protect yourself? Like it's part of the Constitution. And
Interesting.
just,
It's interesting
yeah,
that when you buy from a drug dealer on the black market, you probably assume that they probably have a pistol or something on them somewhere. Um, the only person in theory that's going to have a pistol on them at a legal dispensary is the guard.
the security guard that's supposed to protect everybody that's in there.
Supposed to protect the plants and the people that are all in there. And
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting because, I'm not a NRA member. I've shot guns. I don't own a gun, but grew up in Ohio doing that whole kind of thing. And as much as, I don't disagree with a lot of the NRA's things, the enemy of my enemy is my friend in the situation when it comes to like freedom, where you say, absolutely. Not only that, that goes, if you have a medical patient, that goes against HIPAA laws. You can't you can't discriminate because of medical issues. So now, if a veteran comes home with bad PTSD and aggressive tendencies, those are the reasons why they shouldn't have a firearm, not because they're smoking cannabis, which induces the opposite effect of rage and all that stuff. So, like you said, a case by case basis, sure, in specific instances like we are just talking about, but carte blanche, obviously you cannot discriminate firearm use. Whether or not you agree with guns or not, that's not the issue right here. The issue is discrimination of access to a thing that they should have access to.
Yep. And like, I'll say from my personal experience and behavior, whatever, you know, I do own firearms, plural, and you know, that didn't happen until I was, just a couple of years ago going through all of the stuff that happened with all of the riots here in LA. And, my now wife was just, rightfully concerned that there could be the potential for needing to protect ourselves. And, a golf club or some sort of like,
Ain't gonna do
baseball
it.
bat or something like that is not going to cut it, especially now. Literally last night, we're sitting on the couch and she just, casually refers to me, uh, 32-year-old man shot to death outside of business in North Hollywood. And it's literally like, a couple miles from where I live right now. And this
Hmm.
is outside of a restaurant I've been to before and a place that I was potentially going to work for a little bit. But just
Dude,
like,
this when
it's
I
just
was
so
living
crazy.
at I was living on in Mid City off of Cadillac,
Hmm.
on the way to Culver City,
Hmm.
and that little kind of mid city LA
Yeah.
area. And where I was living, I don't know if it's Section 8, but I think it either used to be or you know, is. But I'm sitting there when I first moved up to LA playing a video game with my roommate, and we just hear pop, 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 pop. And he's just like, what was that? And I was like, those are gunshots, bro. And he goes, no. And I was like, dude, I know what gunshots are. Those were gunshots. We go outside to our balcony and we don't see anything or whatever, but we hear the cops a few minutes later. We're inside. You ever been inside the yellow lines, the yellow tape?
No.
Yeah.
Yikes.
We were inside the yellow tape, and across the street on the balcony, there was like 3 or 4 gunshot holes, and somebody did a drive-by of the balcony.
Yikes.
And I was like, okay,
Time to move.
that's
Time
my
to
cue
move.
to move. Just like my cue to move out of my last place in LA was when the homeless person died on my front, you know, stoop, and I'm having to duck, dip, dive, and dodge dog shit on the sidewalk, where literally, 3 weeks later, after the dog shit's clean up, we see people eating there, at a. I just
Restaurant.
can't couple that. So,
So,
like, you're
so
paying
weird.
$37 for a steak to sit outside where a homeless person just pooped. You know,
Yeah. So
doesn't make
crazy.
sense to me. Um,
So
but
crazy.
but overall, this is good that a federal court is protecting marijuana consumers in some way, shape, or form. And
Absolutely.
a lot of veteran, arms holders are cannabis users, so
Yep. Because it's obviously something that they would, in a lot of cases, rather use that than any of the psychotropics that they're prescribed, or opiates, or alcohol, or any of the other copious amounts of alternatives that mainstream society would love nothing more than to shove down their throats.
and that's why VA doctors until very recently could not even discuss, let alone prescribe cannabis. Like they were literally intentionally warned and told you do not mention medical marijuana healing because we basically have a monopoly contract with pill people, so
Yep.
um, not to
Yep.
say the quiet part out loud, but hey, we send them to war, mess them up, and then we treat them when they get home,
Hmm.
you
Let,
know.
let alone the psychological trauma that they have to endure just in their training process. That's
Right.
not
They
to
just
speak
break
of
you
anything that
down
they,
and
yeah, that's not to say anything about what they have to see, in war zones, or like,
right.
here's
And again,
just
full support for any veteran or person that decides to join the military. That's, you know,
100%.
you have all my respect, and that's why I'm saying this is because I don't want you to have to go through that stuff. Um, you know,
So interesting sidebar to that effect, like, obviously everything happening in Palestine being the tragedy that it is, and the genocidal, actions that are being supported by the US government, and, the potential for boots on the ground to be there, and all of this, a lot of outlets and commentators are talking about the fact that, that it's majority women and children that are being targeted and killed. Well, I remember talking to a veteran who also worked in the intelligence community, who also, does uh, work in the in the cybersecurity realm,
Hmm.
and him telling me about the fact that like some deployments put you in predicaments where, you may not, like you may have that moral compass and boundary of not killing kids. Like
Hmm.
that sure, that the your brain reflexively tells you that that's wrong. But
That's the
when
mission.
you have a, person that is under 18 years old, sometimes as young as like 4 or 5, running toward your facility,
Right.
wearing what you can obviously see is either a vest, or the other story that he told me was they were literally carrying a landmine.
For those of you listening, he's basically outlining the plot of American Sniper, the movie.
Yeah. And
Where
but
he's
like,
he's sitting there like this and he's like, you know,
right. Or
which
the other,
started in Vietnam too,
and another story that he told me was like, the children in some of like the African countries that have, you know different militaries deployed there, like some of the, you know cultures and militia groups over there, they literally like drug and, get these kids like hooked on who knows what.
You seen Lord of
Slap
War?
Yep. Slap
Brown
a,
Brown.
a Yeah, slap a gun in their hand and then tell them to go and kill anybody that's wearing camo,
Yep.
or, that has an American flag on them, or whatever.
Give him a line of
But
cocaine and gunpowder.
yeah, and so like you end up hearing these stories and having, uh, at least I did, this extreme shift in perspective in terms of both what military personnel are faced with in reality on the ground in some of these places, and two, that, the blanket statements of like, any person that kills a kid is a, awful human being. It's like that's a really naive assumption, to know that like every instance of, why that kid was targeted was just, for the sake of just killing a kid and taking away of innocence. Like you never know, that kid's innocence could have been totally corroded and corrupted years prior, and, they were in their mind fulfilling a mission that was put forward to them by somebody that they had to obey. And
I did
yet,
read,
go ahead.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, no, it's kind of a long,
I
gross
I
diatribe,
did
but
I did read what you're talking about, because they're doing these negotiations between Palestine and Israel and everything.
hmm
The Palestinian leader, or the Hamas leader, I would say, not the Palestinian leader, the Hamas leader, I think, said that they agree to the term that they will no longer pay uh, the families after that person dies if they kill an Israeli.
mm,
Um, the Hamas leader said, as part of our condition, right? Um, they didn't say that they're going to obviously stop encouraging it, but they said they will, any family that's currently on like the payroll right now, they will stop. Um, and they will
mm,
not pay bounties, basically. I forget what the
right,
term is. It's a term, but they basically just pay your family for life. It's like what the mob does, basically. Like,
right. It's like you kill our enemy, we'll take care of your family.
right. Like if you die in our line of business, we'll take care of your family. Don't worry, yada, yada,
Right.
yada. But I do know that you were talking about the reason why this is relevant to Ukraine when you're talking about Ukraine, because Ukraine last year legalized medical marijuana. And Ukraine's a huge, well, it was, I don't know about what's going to be, but it was a huge number one or two or three exporter of wheat in the world.
Oh, it's like, yeah, it's definitely in the top three. It's the
Top, yeah, top three wheat exporters.
bread basket of the EU.
Hmm. Literally. And at Chernobyl, just to say this again, at Chernobyl, after the nuclear disaster, they planted hemp. And so now the wildlife and vegetation is coming back quicker. And it's very interesting that now Chernobyl is now back in the news with drones hitting it and all that kind of stuff. And
Hmm.
Tulsi Gabbard, who is now the director of national intelligence, is fully aware of hemp and Ukraine because she went over there and visited it. And then she also sponsored in 2020 or 2018, I should say, HR 3530. Anybody can look this up. HR 3530, which is the Hemp Industrialization Act, which would specifically just legalize hemp for industrialization. That bill was introduced and co-sponsored by Democrats and Republicans, who are both all now pretty prevalent players. And this was years ago. So in my estimation, when somebody supports something a few years ago and then that issue is coming up a little bit more, and then now they're in an important place in the government, you can see where it's going, I hope. You can see where,
Hopefully.
it's bottlenecking where to something. I'm not saying we'll like the outcome, but it's
Right.
bottlenecking to something. And Israel has a lot of cannabis science that comes out of Israel as well. A lot of
Yep. Yep.
cannabis, mostly, if not all, the new science tech is out of Israel
Yep.
for cannabis.
So speaking of our roots and stuff, I wanted to give a shout out to both of our former home states. For me, Virginia, lawmakers approved bills regulating adult use cannabis sales, but governor's veto looms. It's interesting because before I moved to California, I actually met with, I think he was a sitting senator, like a Virginia state senator, who was working on the legislation that was going to actually outline the governance of the Virginia cannabis market, and essentially they were going to use, I think it's the Connecticut model, where essentially there's like 4 or 5 regions that are outlined in the legislation, but then each one of those regions only has one siloed seed to sale vertically integrated corporate entity that manages the whole region and has to supply everything to the entire consumer base of that
Yeah.
region, which I was like, I think that sounds kind of silly.
That's what the Ohio in 2020, 2016 legalization ballot was, and they rejected
Hmm.
it. So the people of Ohio said no. So when people say, "Oh, people in Ohio are stupid," no, they're not. They just, you got to give them issues they care about, So,
Yeah,
and because the same thing would have happened in Ohio, where top four, there'd be like 4 manufacturers you could basically buy for forever, and one of them, ironically, was Nick Lachey's business that he
interesting.
um, invested in, which was, I found, very weird connection. These guys are just businessmen, but like at the same time, it's like, how did you get involved in Ohio? I don't. It's interesting.
Well, okay, so that brings me to my next thing that I had pulled up.
By the way, about Virginia, they legalized in 2021. So
Yeah,
they've been slow playing and delaying the sales rollout process. So like literally the last 2 or 3 years, essentially it's just decriminalized in Virginia. Like you can have it, you can smoke it. I don't know if you can grow it, but you just can't buy it anywhere. And that's what
yeah. So it,
a lot of states do that. If it somehow becomes legal on the ballot and they just don't like it, they will just not implement a regulatory framework, which is kind of like what they're doing with crypto right now. Like, hey, I don't like it, so I'm just not going to introduce regulatory framework. I'm not going to go against it, but I'm just not going to help you do it.
yeah.
Um, so, sorry, what were you saying?
No, I was, well, two things. One, the article actually does talk about that. In 2021, Virginia lawmakers enacted legislation legalizing the use, possession, and personal cultivation of marijuana by adults. That legislation called upon lawmakers to authorize licensed cannabis sales by January 1st, 2024. So it should have happened as of last year. However, when Republicans gained control of the House and governorship in 2022, they failed to advance legislation to do so.
Shocker.
Yeah, so this year's bills passed their respective chambers largely about or along party lines. House members approved HB 2485 by a vote of 53 to 46 with limited bipartisan support. The Senate companion bill passed on a strictly party line vote, with all GOP members voting against it.
So
So,
the GOP voted against it and the Democrats voted for it?
yep. So Youngkin's in his final year of his 4-year term. He's obviously said he's not gonna pass anything that's pro cannabis.
Yeah,
Um,
that's why they're not doing it. He's just going, no.
Yeah, and because because apparently Youngkin still believes that the adult marijuana use endangers public health, which obviously we have copious amounts of information at this point that goes against
Well,
that.
again, I
Anyways,
don't I don't think he thinks that. That's just what he's told
yeah,
to say,
right.
so by his
But shout out
donors.
Shout out to your former home state. GOP lawmakers moved to roll back Senate's or state's voter-approved marijuana legalization law.
Yeah. This
So,
is going to fail um, because it would be extremely unpopular
hmm
because this did pass. This was like an actual big thing that passed in Ohio. It was very popular.
2023.
Yeah. And there's been a
57,
lot of
57%.
really?
Yeah, 57% of Ohioans voted for the law in 2023.
I thought it was higher than that. Oh, I'm probably thinking of public supports like in the high 70s, but it's not actual. But was that a midterm?
Yeah.
If that's midterm, that's not because
Uh,
it was
Lawmakers
57 to,
reported fast tracking Senate Bill 56, which seeks to make dozens of changes to Ohio's law. 57% of Ohioans voted for the law in
well,
2023.
was it like 50? They didn't tell you how many voted against it. They just said voted for it.
No.
So if it was like
Mm,
57 to 23, that's a landslide,
yeah.
So yeah, Ohio needs to start doing it because Michigan and Ohio can have a huge. I will say some of the best green I've smoked is from Meigs County, Ohio. Shout out to Meigs County and Athens County, where I went to college at Ohio University. But some of the best little small popcorn nuggets I've ever had are from Meigs County. And actually, folklorishly, I'd never tested this, but I heard when they grow it in the Appalachian Mountains and all that kind of stuff they hang fish hooks on wires at different levels so that you
hmm
can't come and poach their plants.
Oh, interesting.
And so that also animals can't eat them. So, like, if you form a barrier of fish hooks around your plants, in theory, whoever comes is going to get booby trapped.
Yep. Makes sense.
All right. You know,
Makes sense. So, last couple things I was going to bring up. Uh, we talked about this at the when we
oh,
were
yeah.
kind of talking about before, but Bobby Kennedy is officially going to be the head of the HHS. And of
He is
course,
now.
as soon as he was approved, after this actually was written, um, the hearing on the proposed rescheduling of marijuana postponed. The hearing scheduled to begin on Tuesday, January 21st, 2025, regarding the proposed rescheduling of marijuana has been postponed pending resolution of an appeal filed by a party in the proceedings. The order is available on dea.gov.
Sounds like
So I
that was
wonder who
probably
the
delayed until he was confirmed
and yeah, probably.
because
Yeah,
that was in January. And that's probably, if you look at the politics of that, that's why the Biden administration would schedule it for that time because they know nobody will be confirmed at that time.
right,
So it's just like Trump saying, I got us out of Iraq, but you put the date during Biden's administration, not yours,
right,
and
right,
then
right.
then you criticize his withdrawal, fair, but that's how you set yourself up for a critique that benefits you know.
Yeah.
So
So lastly though, just kind of piggybacking off of the Bobby Kennedy thing, Unlimited Hangout, Whitney Webb, she's someone that I think both you and I have a lot of respect for. She also has previously written for this platform, The Last American Vagabond. But fortunately for her, ended up getting enough of a name for herself that she started her own outlet. So kudos to Whitney. Keep up the great work. But one of the recent articles by her and a co-writer, Max Jones, Teal-linked HHS nominee threatens Maha ambitions with biotech stance. Biotech investor and Peter Thiel associate Jim O'Neill is poised to usher in a deregulatory paradigm that would allow a proliferation of dubious products on the US market under the guise of, quote, innovation and efficacy. So this kind of like dovetails with the whole like, mRNA personalized cancer vaccine discussions that, the Oracle Larry Ellison dude was talking about a couple weeks
mhm.
ago, and just like, a lot of the players in this administration are not what everybody would, I think, likely hope for or want if they actually looked under the hood beneath the surface layer of things. Like,
If they were a car, we would refer to them as all show and no go.
yeah, very, very
That's
much so.
that's what we would say about them.
Very, very much so. But, obviously, if you've got 40 minutes to read an article, I can never recommend Winnie's articles enough. They are deep dives into these
Right.
subjects, and she is super well researched, and all of her other contributing authors are
I,
super well
I put her
researched
up
as
there right
well.
now with probably one of the best unbiased independent journalists out there right now,
100%.
if
Also,
if not the best.
speaking of this, I actually was just listening to one of the shows that they did, but so Ryan Christian of The Last American Vagabond actually did put together what he's now calling the Independent Media Alliance. So it's like it's Ryan Christian, Last American Vagabond. It's Derek Bros, The Conscious Resistance, who's also a T-Lab contributor. Whitney Webb, her co-writer, partner, whatever, Mark Goodwin, also huge in the cryptocurrency space. He was a big, I think he was the editor in chief of Bitcoin Magazine for a while. He's
Mhm.
super knowledgeable when it comes to all things crypto. Um, Catherine Austin Fitts of Solari Report, Steve Poikonen of And Wake Up. Um, who else was in that conversation? The guy that runs Geopolitics and Empire, he's another good, like great source. But yeah, so like the Independent Media Alliance, I was like super like excited to know that that was all coming together. I'm pretty sure like James Corbett is probably a part of it. But just like,
Glenn Greenwald.
really, no, I don't think Glenn is, because Glenn's had his own
Yeah. He's got his own
stuff
issues.
stuff.
Yeah.
But like, all these people, high credibility, high integrity, literally like, hold themselves to an extremely high standard in terms of their own investigative and journalistic processes, and really ultimately are just trying to, form the society in the future that would benefit, the broader humanity. And,
Well, let's submit our application for him, and
yeah,
actually, what
I've
on the
reached
on
out
the
to
last
him.
thing, go back one more time to marijuana moment. I want to put a little
Sure,
button on the RFK issue
sure.
and go to the politics section of marijuana moment. And there should be an article on February 13th. That's RFK Jr. said this I really do want to cover, because it shows what you implied earlier about the switch up or double speak when politicians are actually running for something. Um, yeah, hit the
Oh, is it there?
wherever the politics issue or the politics tab is.
Politics.
Scroll down. Yeah, go to more posts.
That's annoying. Trump's White House budget director says marijuana is a gateway drug and push to roll back state
Oh,
legalization.
it doesn't
But
have it on there.
uh,
You might just have to Google RFK Jr. said, yeah,
about
right
how
there. There it
marijuana is
is.
harmful. This one?
Wait. Yes. Wait. RFK Jr. Yeah, that's the one, I guess. But that's not the article I have up. Um, Let me see if there's I'm gonna email it to you real quick. But it
Um,
talks about that. Um, because earlier he said, so to back up, while he was running for president as an independent candidate, he said he wanted to legalize it and then use all the tax revenue to form healing centers and prevention and addiction, that kind of thing.
mhm.
Uh, Similar to a place I believe in Italy that they have. Um,
Portugal also did the same thing.
yeah, that too. So I just emailed it to you. And now, and he honestly, whether you like him or not, he had a very, out of all the candidates, even including the uh, like the Vivek candidates, kind of people that were running during the primaries, he had, good or bad, one of the most extensive stances on it with details and kind of what he wants to do, how he wants to do tax revenue and kind of all that stuff, and actually outlined it, which was okay, cool. You put some thought into it and you know what you want to do. But now he's just saying literally the exact opposite. So he got confirmed and he said, I will refer to I will I'll defer to the DEA on cannabis, which is not a pro-friendly, pro-cannabis, department.
Yeah.
Did you get my email?
Dude, so given all the computer problems and stuff that I was talking to you about before we went and started recording, like it's just not.
Oh, okay.
It's not the
If you
plug.
go back to the screen though, just Google RFK. So anyway, RFK Jr. says marijuana can have, quote, catastrophic impacts on consumers, but state level legalization can spur research on its harms and benefits. So he said on Thursday that he is, quote, worried about the normalization of high potency marijuana, that he feels it can have really catastrophic impacts on people, but state level legalization can facilitate research into its harms and benefits. Now, I don't necessarily disagree with that, where,
Mhm.
for example, the government created a THC that can keep you high for 3 days. It's that strong. That's a
So
fact.
crazy.
People can Google that. Um, so this is kind of a wait and see approach, but it would be interesting to see. He'll probably be leading the rescheduling hearing. Um, is he going to reschedule it or is he going to deschedule it? If he reschedules it, that means he may have done a deal with the DEA, because then they still can arrest people.
Right.
Um, and also, if you take away that right, how would that work with the drug cartels on the border? Right? Then, would you have to go after just what if they're not selling cocaine? They're selling weed.
Hmm.
Now, obviously, if you find 8,000 pounds in a tunnel, that's not for personal use unless you're, you know,
Right.
Cheech and Chong on a bender.
A giant.
Right. Um, so, however, Kennedy said that worry also has to be balanced with the impacts that we've had before as it relates to criminalization. So, who knows? It got rescheduled because he wasn't confirmed yet. So the rescheduling hearing will probably take place in the next few months. Um, but that is also, there has been no, from what I can tell, this is just my blunt opinion, no pun intended, but
Hmm.
I don't think the Trump administration has any desire to change the cannabis laws. Um,
Yeah.
unless a company, like John Boehner, who sits on the board of, a cannabis company, comes to him and says, how much money do you want for the midterms? And, you know, hey, if the Democrats want to run on something, this would be a good issue that 70-80% of all people agree on. Um,
Yep.
that should be decriminalized at the very minimum. But I just don't see Trump, unless he really gets pushed on the states' rights things, like if he says, listen, I'm going to reschedule it, that's all I'm going to do. If you're a state, do what you want. Um, it depends on if he needs tax revenue, then that would be an easy way to get some.
That's what I was just gonna say. Ultimately, in my opinion, it just depends on what he needs, and if the people and the political, you know, what do you call it? Like, the political capital, for lack of a
Right.
better term, is what he needs in order to get something else accomplished. But, anyways, dude, I gotta. I'm
Yeah,
getting
bro.
text from the wife.
Dude,
But this is
great.
great. This is
Great
I really.
discussion last week tonight. Everybody, thanks for joining us. Go follow his Instagram page and YouTube channel, Philosophies. We'll put the links in the bio, and I'll try to put the links in the description of the article, or not bio, links in the description. Um, so awesome. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Last Weed Tonight with the Cannabis Podcast and Philosophies. And until next time, stay blessed and don't forget to tip your bud tenders
Question everything.
and
Peace out,
question
Brett.
everything.